situations and do the best we can. The situation ended up being rather ridiculous. We had previously a leaker on our board who, with, I don't think any malice, but just complete flaunting of the rules, continued to supply journalists with advance word of important decisions, like the name of target companies that we were thinking of acquiring, whose prices were shooting up in the marketplace, making us all vulnerable to, you know, fair disclosure problems with the SEC. There were leaks about secret, you know, or confidential discussions with the CEO and her future, and oh my God, the things that this did inside the boardroom was just created tremendous lack of trust and a sense of betrayal among people who had grievances going back to the last picture with each other anyway. So this became a very fraught situation. And one of the decisions that was made within the company was to put their normal processes in motion to deal, and every company has these, to try to find out what the source of this disclosure of unauthorized information was. Was it on the board? Was it in senior management? Was it in outside advisors? Who was doing it? So the people worked at, actually it was a group within the company who does this work, and I suppose every big company has a unit of some sort that does an investigation unit. It's not uncommon. Well, one of the things that they did, which was at the time, my understanding now, was that it was strictly speaking legal, but certainly ethically questionable and becoming grayer and grayer from a strategic standpoint, was this getting telephone records from the phone companies of board members. My phone records were sought and used in this way. I mean, lots and lots of people, including journalists, were their records were obtained. And the one of the results of all of that work was that a sort of firm identification of the leaker was made. But this guy had an ally on the board who was very reluctant to see him identified. I turned the whole matter over to the head of the audit committee and stepped back because I thought it was, you know, under the company's standard of business conduct rules, violations were the business of the audit committee. And so he was shepherding this case through, but this individual on the board who was upset by the identification of the culprit decided that I was the public enemy number one. And long story short, I ended up being charged with 4 felonies by the state attorney general, Bill Lockyer at the time, was now state treasurer, and having a lot of negative publicity. My reputation, which had been pretty unbesmirched, I have to say, after that point, became highly smirched. And I mean, it was and I had to prepare for court, for my court case, which occurred over the past, almost a year of that. I was called, or as they say, hauled before Congress. I had to testify for almost 7 hours before a very hostile committee of Congress. And it was a very unpleasant experience, I have to say that. That I know I've had time to think about in retrospect of what could I have done differently, and how do I link this to being a woman in the boardroom. over that. I think the thing that I was, we're guilty. I don't feel guilty, but that I was, I was subject to. I thought I could be the hero and make everybody get along. I thought I could, by applying, listening skills and trying to explain what I was hearing that I could understand and sympathize with to other people who weren't listening and weren't understanding it. That I could heal these deep wounds, and that would be a heck of an accomplishment. I would feel really good about that. So I kept going long after it was probably clear to anybody except me that it was hopeless, and that these grievances and personal differences were so deep that it just wasn't going to, just take a nice lady who's going to, sort of smooth things over. It just wasn't going to work. So in the process of doing that, I managed to anger somebody so much that he made it virtually his life's work at that point for several years to make sure that I was seen as a failure and that I was humiliated publicly by having gone against his wishes. So the other thing I learned was that if you find yourself having to work with a clinical narcissist who has a lot of money, run the other way real quick. Those people can do a lot of harm, and if you're not really, I was less perspicacious than I should have been about how unhappy you can make somebody when you're doing something that you think is right, that you know needs to be done, but is violently against their wishes. So, I don't really like to say that's a lesson because, frankly, none of us are, we're not about failure, right? We're about achievement. And so I say these things in the spirit of great candor, but I'm not at the same time trying to leave you with the impression that if you come up against a hard problem and a very difficult individual, you shouldn't try to make the best thing happen that you can try to do. But at a certain level, you do have to think about yourself. And it's not that I'm so selfless, it's just that I thought I could be a hero. So it was more, possibly more ego than selflessness that drove that decision. So, now I look at the HP board and I think, wow, they've got at least 3 women on board, all of whom are, one of whom I recruited, sorry, Melzoff, who was the second command in India, and one of the top European businesswomen. She was the first non-American, as well as the first woman to be recruited to the HP board after me. There are 2 brand new women who have just come on board with a recent reshuffle. So, I think things are moving in the right direction, not just at HP, but environmentally. Alice and I were just chatting about the fact that in Europe now there are a couple of countries, one of them is Sweden and France, Norway, who now regulate the law that women have to be represented on the boards of public companies. I'm not suggesting we should have a prescription like that in the U.S. I think women can get there on their merits. But I do think it changes the dynamic. And it's also partly, and I should have said this earlier and I'll wind up, there's a lot of generational differences that are just going to go away because they're, people will leave the scene. who are now middle managers and above in business